Welcome once again. In today's session, we are going to look at how to measure the jugular venous pressure. So first of all, what is the jugular venous pressure? So let's take this bottle of water. If you look at this bottle of water, look at it very well. At the top of it, no matter how standstill it is, you will realize that the top is oscillating. That oscillating top of this vertical column of blood, we will take this as blood, in the right internal jugular vein, that reflects pressure changes in the cardiac cycle. We call it the jugular venous pulse. But if you have the vertical height of this column of blood in the right internal jugular vein reflecting the pressure changes in the cardiac cycle, we call it the jugular venous pressure. So the jugular venous pressure is more of what? The vertical height, as we are saying. Okay. So now we want to know how to measure the jugular venous pressure. Indirectly, we are saying that we are going to measuring the vertical height. So when we were defining the jugular venous pressure, we said it refers to the vertical height of a column of blood in the right internal jugular vein that reflects pressure changes in the cardiac cycle, specifically in the right atrium. So to measure the jugular venous pressure, or as the medical standards purported, you have to, wash your hands as usual. Introduce yourself to the patient, confirm patient details, explain the examination you're about to do on this patient. Please, my name is Dr. Daniel. I'm about to measure your jugular venous pressure in your neck. I go ahead, and the patient will tell you that yes, you can do so. That is more like seeking and gaining consent. So now you've gained the consent. What do you do next? The next thing you are going to be doing is to first of all position the patient. And what is going to be the position? By putting the patient in the cardiac position. That is the angle between the trunk of the patient and the bed would be equal to 45 degrees. And that is also referred to as a semi-fowler's position. We said that is used most commonly in the obstetrics department, specifically in the labor ward. We have the cardiac position here. We position the patient. First thing we are going to do is to first of all localize the point of maximum venous pulsation. And this venous pulsation is going to come from where? From the right internal jugular vein. Then somebody will ask, why are we using the right internal jugular vein? Why? First of all, you should know, if you take this diagram here, as you can see, the right internal jugular vein has straight course. As you can see, it is in an almost straight line with the superior vena cava. Hence, favor the transmission of hemodynamic changes from the right atrium. That is one. The second reason why we would use the right internal jugular vein is because the left internal jugular vein is inclined at an angle, hence can easily be compressed between the sternum and the aorta should there be a dilated aorta or what we call an aortic aneurysm. Yeah? So that is why we are using the right internal jugular vein. It means that we have to stand at the right of the patient and we are going to be observing at the right aspect of the neck. Another question will come up. The question is going to be, how would you know that the pulsation that you are seeing is not that of the carotid artery, that of the jugular vein? That's the right internal jugular vein. There are parameters that can be used to differentiate between carotid pulsation and jugular venous pulsation. So, first of all, you should know that the jugular venous pulse has a double waveform. Double waveform in that it has two pulsations per systole. That's going to be the X and Y descent. Also, the carotid pulse has just a single waveform, meaning single pulsation per systole. The second one is that if we take the jugular venous pulsation or the jugular venous pulse, it varies with position. But the carotid pulsation or pulse does not vary with position. Why are we saying that? If you look at this patient, as we are demonstrating using the dummy, we position him in the cardiac position. And the question is, why are we doing so? Why not in the supine? Why not in the sitting position, but in the cardiac position? Now, let me explain that to you. If we take this bottle of water if you put it in position, let's take this as our head and neck. This is the neck. If you put it in a sitting position, you realize that the upper level of the venous pulsation will fall below the clavicle. And anything that will fall below the clavicle, you cannot see with your eyes. So if the upper level of the venous pulsation falls below the clavicle, whilst the patient is sitting, it means that the upper level of venous pulsation or the maximum venous pulsation cannot be seen. And if it cannot be seen, then it means that we cannot measure the jugular venous pressure. What do you ask? Why not in the supine position? In the supine position, the upper level of the venous pulsation will run beyond the angle of the jaw into the intracranial cavity. Then you ask yourself, anything in your head, can you see? Can you see? No. So if I ask you, what's the color of your brain, would you tell me? Because you cannot see. The same thing, if the upper level of the venous pulsation run beyond the angle of the jaw into the intracranial cavity, that means that we cannot see. And once we cannot see, we cannot measure the jugular venous pressure. But look, if we position this patient in the cardiac position, what are we going to have? Look, in the cardiac position, this is what we are going to have. You realize that the upper level of the venous pulsation will now be at the level of the neck, which we can see. And once we can see, it means we can measure. That is why to measure the jugular venous pulsation, to measure the jugular venous pressure, the patient must be in the cardiac position. Now, we put the patient in the cardiac position, as you can see. The next thing we are going to do is to ask the patient to turn, or we can passively turn the head of the patient, or ask the patient to turn the head to the left slightly. Ask the patient to turn the head to the left slightly. Or you can passively turn the head of the patient to the left slightly. Why that? So the reason is that turning the head of the patient slightly to the left relaxes the sternocleidomastoid muscle, because the right, so let's say this is our sternocleidomastoid muscle. Let's take this as our sternocleidomastoid muscle. We'll take these as the sternal head, which is here. Then we'll take this as the clavicular head. And we know that they will fixate at the mastoid process. That is why we call it the sternocleidomastoid muscle, right? Now look at what we are going to be having. The right internal jugular vein would pass between the clavicular head and the sternal head of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So asking the patient to turn the head, or turning the head of the patient slightly to the left, relaxes the sternocleidomastoid muscle, opening it up, allowing 4 pulsations to be seen in the right internal jugular vein. So with that being said, we'll be able to find the upper level of what? The jugular venous pulsation, or the upper level of what? The venous pulsation, or simply the maximum venous pulsation will be seen. Let's take this as the maximum venous pulsation. So we come here, let's say we are looking at the neck of the patient. Definitely, to be able to view that properly, we will need to use beam of rays from a pen torch. So we will shine a pen torch onto the neck to be able to see the upper level of what? Venous pulsation. Yeah? Then there's something that we were talking about before we skip. That is, we're talking about how to distinguish between the arterial pulsation and the venous pulsation. We made mention of 2. We said the venous pulsation, that's the jugular venous pulsation, is double pulsation per systole. That's a double waveform in systole. And the arterial pulsation, that's the carotid pulsation, is what? Single waveform. And we said that the jugular venous pulsation varies with the position. That's what we explained. The carotid pulsation does not vary with position. The next one is that The jugular venous pulsation is impalpable. If I should put my hand there, I won't be able to feel. So if I put my hand there, anything I feel will become the carotid pulsation. So carotid pulsation is palpable. Jugular venous pulsation is impalpable. It's impalpable. It's impalpable. The next one is that jugular venous pulsation varies, or the height of the jugular venous pulse, or the jugular venous pulsation varies with respiration. And what is this variation? On inspiration, the height of the jugular venous pulse decreases, and on expiration, the height of the jugular venous pulse increases. So when you are inspiring, the height of your jugular venous pulse will decrease, and when you are exhaling, the height of the jugular venous pulse would what? Increase. That's a physiological phenomenon. We can have an abnormality of that phenomenon we call the Kussmaul sign, where the jugular venous pressure will be increasing on inspiration, and you have that in conditions such as cardiac tamponade, restrictive cardiomyopathies, constrictive pericarditis, tension pneumothorax, severe acute asthma, and so forth and so on. Yeah. Then another distinguishing feature between a carotid pulse and a jugular venous pulse is that the jugular venous pulse can be obliterated at the base of the waveform, meaning that if you apply pressure just above the clavicle, we can be able to what? Obliterate the jugular venous pulsation. But if we take the carotid pulsation, it cannot be obliterated at the base of the waveform, that is above the clavicle. Then finally, with jugular venous pulsation, there's a transient increase in the height of the waveform with abdominal jugular reflux or hepatojugular reflux. Abdominal jugular reflux because I'm applying a continuous pressure, slight continuous pressure over the abdomen, which will cause a rise in the height of the vertical column of blood in the right internal jugular vein. Why? Because the right internal jugular vein, or generally internal jugular veins, are what? Valveless. And the same reason, if I should apply a gentle continuous pressure over the right costal margin, that is over the liver, it can cause an increase in the jugular venous pressure. That is the vertical height of the column of blood in the right internal jugular vein. Now, we've located the upper level of the jugular venous pulsation using a pen touch with the patient in the cardiac position. What are we going to do next? We can now undress this patient up to the level of what? The waist. Yeah? Mostly if it's female, you can delay the undressing till you are done finding the upper level of the venous pulsation. But if they are males, from the word go, you can undress them up to the level of what? The waist. Are we getting that? Now, once we are done locating the upper level of the venous pulsation, what are we going to do next? Well, this is what we are going to do next. We are going to look for, again, the sternal angle. And what is the sternal angle again? The sternal angle is the transverse prominence that can be felt between the junction of the manubrium and the body of the sternum. So let's take this to be our sternal angle. And we know that sternal angle is an anatomical landmark for a lot of structures, such as it marks the point at which the trachea bifurcates. It marks at the point at which the pulmonary trunk bifurcates. It marks the level of the second costal cartilage and extend laterally into the second intercostal space. The trachea carinae is located deep to the sternal angle, and so forth and so on. So once we find our sternal angle, what are we going to do next? With the help of two straight rulers, with one placed vertically from the sternal angle and the other placed horizontally from the point of maximum venous pulsation, that's from the upper level of venous pulsation, such that they make an angle of what? 90 degrees. So it means that we are going to be bending the rulers to ensure that wherever they are meeting is what? 90 degrees. It's 90 inclined to each other. And if you look at this very well, if you look at what we are having here, at an angle of 90, we are having the vertical distance from the external angle to be 3 centimeters. The vertical distance from the external angle when it was touched by the horizontal ruler, or the ruler placed horizontally from the upper level of venous position, it gave us what? 3 centimeters. Now, that is going to be 3 centimeters. But to get the jugular venous pressure, what are we going to do? So from our measurement, we had 3 centimeters. But to get the jugular venous pressure, we'll have to add 5 centimeters to it to give us the jugular venous pressure. And the unit is in centimeters of water. And why are we adding 5 centimeters? The reason why we are adding 5 centimeters is because the distance, the vertical distance from the center of the right atrium to the sternal angle is 5 centimeters. So if this is the sternal angle, and this is the center of the right atrium, this distance from the right atrium to the sternal angle is what? 5 centimeters. And it is constant. That is why we have to add it to what? Whatever value that we are getting on the vertical ruler to give us the jugular venous pressure. Now, then we will ask again, what is the normal jugular venous pressure? So for the normal jugular venous pressure, if we take it from the right atrium, it's less than 9 centimeters of water. But if you take the jugular venous pressure from the sternal angle, then it is going to be less than what? 4 centimeters of water. If we take the jugular venous pressure measurement and relate it to the right atrium, it should be less than 9 centimeters of water to be considered normal. But if we take it from the sternal angle, then it should be less than 4 centimeters of water. Why the variation in those values? Because if you are making reference to your right atrium, then you are supposed to take the vertical distance, or that height, that distance from the center of the right atrium to the external angle, which we cannot measure externally. It is fixed, so we have to add it. And so it means that if you are having a jugular venous pressure greater than or equal to 9 centimeters going, then we are thinking of an elevated jugular venous pressure. And if you are having it lower than expected, then we will call it a low jugular venous pressure. Any question?
Yes, sir. My question is, why do you use the internal jugular vein in measuring the JVP and not the external jugular vein?
So your question asks, why are we using the internal jugular vein and not the external jugular vein? So there are 4 reasons to that. The first one is that if you take the internal jugular veins, you realize that they are anatomically closer to the superior vena cava than the external jugular vein. So if they are anatomically closer to the superior vena cava, they can favor the transmission of pressure changes or hemodynamic changes from the right atrium. That is one. The second one is that the internal jugular veins are valveless, meaning that if there is any increase in the pressure in the right atrium, it can easily undergo a retrograde transmission back into the internal jugular veins because there are no valves there to restrict them. That is what makes it possible for the phenomenon known as hepatojugular reflux and what? Abdominal jugular reflux. That's the second one. So the third reason will be, if we say the external jugular veins, they are more superficial, hence prone to kinking. Then finally, should there be vasoconstriction due to hypotension, as may occur in heart failures, it may cause the external jugular veins to become small and barely visible. So those are the reasons why the internal jugular veins are preferred to the external jugular vein. I believe that you learned something new today. Thank you very much.